the people doing the work and shipping things every day, you are toast. You are toast.
A lot of people are starting to think we're moving a little bit too fast when it comes to OpenAI's incredible performance with ChatGPT-4, the plugins and all this. And so the Future of Life Institute, which was formed in 2015, it's a nonprofit that's focused on de-risking major technology like AI. They did a petition titled Pause Giant AI Experiments, an open letter. A bunch of computer scientists signed this letter. And the letter, quote, says, we must ask ourselves, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us? Should we risk loss of control of our civilization? A number of notable tech leaders like Elon, Steve Wozniak, and a handful of DeepMind researchers have signed it. What do you guys think of the latter? Are we going to slow down or not? And then we could ask the question generally, how close are we getting to AGI, which is what everybody's scared of, is that these agents start working with each other in the background to do things that are against human interest. I know it sounds like science fiction, but there is a theory that when these AIs start operating on their own, like we explained in the previous sort of segment here with plugins, and they make agents that are operating based on feedback from each other, could they get out of control and be mischievous and then work against human interests? So what do you think, Sacks?
I think there's a difference between what could happen in the short term and then what could happen in the long term. I think in the short term, everything we're seeing right now is very positive. And let me just give you an example. There was a really interesting tweet storm about a guy who wrote about how ChatGPT saved his dog. Did you guys see this? This was one of the really mind-blowing ones to me, use cases. So his dog was sick, took him to a vet. Vet prescribed some medication. 3 days later, dog's still sick. In fact, even worse. So the owner of the pet just literally copied and pasted the lab result for the blood test for the dog with all the lab values into ChatGPT and said, what could this be? Like, what's your likely diagnosis? ChatGPT gave 3 possible answers, 3 illnesses. The first one was what the vet basically had diagnosed with, so that wasn't it. The second one was excluded by another test. So he then went to a second vet and said, listen, I think my dog has the third one. And vet prescribed something, and sure enough, dog is cured, saved. So that's really mind-blowing that even though ChatGPT hasn't been specifically optimized, as far as we know, for lab results, it could figure this out. The reason I'm mentioning this is it gives you a sense of the potential here to cure disease, to, like I could see major medical breakthroughs based on the AI in the next 5 or 10 years. Now, the question is, like, what happens in the long term, as the AI gets smarter and smarter, and we are kind of getting into the realm of science fiction, but here would be the scenario is you're on ChatGPT 10 or 20 or whatever it is, or maybe some other company's AI. And the developers ask the AI, hey, how could you make yourself better? Now do it, which is a question we ask ChatGPT all the time in different contexts. And so ChatGPT will already have the ability to write perfect code by that point. I think, code writing is one of of its superpowers already. So it gives itself the ability to rewrite its code, to auto-update it, to recursively make itself better. I mean, at that point, isn't that like a speciation event? Doesn't that very quickly lead to the singularity if the AI has the capability to rewrite its own code, to make itself better? And, won't it very quickly write billions of versions of itself? And, it's very hard to predict what that future looks like. Now, I also don't know how far away we are from that. That could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. But I think it's a question worth asking for sure.
Is it worth slowing down, though, Sacks? Should we be pausing? Because based on what you've said, and I think you've framed it properly, when these things hit a certain point and they start reinforcing their own learning with each other, they can go at infinite speed, right? This is not comparable to human speed. They could be firing off millions, billions of different
I think you're right.
Scenarios.
We're definitely now on this fuck around, find out curve.
Yeah.
And so there's only one way to really find out, which is somebody's going to push the boundaries. The competitive dynamics will get the better of some startup. They'll do something that people will look back on and say, whoa, that was a bridge too far. So yeah, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think we're not going to slow down. I actually think it's going the other way. I think things are going to speed up. And the reason they're going to speed up is because the one thing Silicon Valley is really good at is taking advantage of a platform shift. And so when you think about like all the VCs and all the founders, everyone accuses us of being lemmings. And so when there's like kind of like a fake platform shift or people kind of glom onto something that ends up not being real, everyone's kind of got egg on their faces. But the flip side of that is that when the platform shift is real, Silicon Valley is really good at throwing money at it. The talent knows how to go after it, and they keep making it better and better. And so that's the dynamic we're in right now. You look at 70% of the last YC class was already all AI startups. I'm sure the next one will probably be 95%. So I think that we're on a path here where the pace of innovation is actually going to speed up. Companies are going to compete with each other. They're going to seek to invent new capabilities. And I think the results are going to all be incredibly positive for some period of time. Like, the vet example, we're going to cure illnesses. We're going to solve major problems.
So if they're positive, then we invest more, we trust more. But the paradox of that, as Chamath is pointing out, Friedberg, is if we trust it more, we invest more, then some person in a free market is going to say, you know what, I need to beat ChatGPT. Therefore, I'm going to take the rails off this thing. I'm going to let it go faster and take off some constraints because I need to win. And I'm so far behind. How do you feel about that scenario that sort of Chamath and Sacks teed up, Friedberg?
I think there's like GPT-3, I think, ran on 700 gigs. Is that right? Does anyone know what GPT-4 runs on? It's got to be on some number that's, not many multiples of that. But look, someone could make a copy of this thing and fork it and develop an entirely new model. I think that's what's incredible about software and digital technology, and also kind of, means that it's very hard to contain. Similar to like what we've seen in biology, ever since biology got digitized through DNA sequencing and the ability to kind of express molecules through gene editing. You can't control or contain the ability to do gene editing work at all because everyone knows the code. Everyone can make CRISPR-Cas molecules. Everyone can make gene editing systems in any lab, anywhere. Once it was out, it was out. And now there's hundreds of variants for doing gene editing, many of which are much improved over CRISPR-Cas9. I use that as an analogy because it was this breakthrough technology that allowed us to specifically edit genomes, and that allowed us to engineer biology and do these incredible things where biology effectively became software. And remember, CRISPR-Cas9 gave us effectively a word processing type tool, find and replace. And the tooling that's evolved from that is much better. So whatever is underlying, whatever the parameters are for GPT-4, whatever that model is, if a close enough replicant of that model exists or a copy of that model is made, and then new training data and new evolutions can be done separately, you could see many, many variants kind of emerge from here. And I think this is a good echoing of Chamath's point. We don't know what's ultimately going to win. Is there enough of a network effect in the plugin model, as Sacks pointed out, to really give OpenAI the sustaining competitive advantage? I'm not sure. The model runs on 700 gigs. That's less data than, fits on my iPhone. So, I could take that model, I could take the parameters of that model, and I could create an entirely new version. I could fork it, and I could do something entirely new with it. So I don't think you can contain it. I don't think that this idea that we can put in place some regulatory constraints and say it's illegal to do this, or, try and, create IP around it or protections around it is realistic at this state. The power of the tool is so extraordinary. The extendability of the tools are so extraordinary. So the economic and, the various incentives are there for, other models to emerge. And whether they're directly copied from someone hacking into OpenAI servers and making a copy of that model, or whether they're, open sourced, or whether that someone generates something that's 95% as good and then it forks and a whole new class of models emerge. I think this is it's, as Sacks pointed out, highlighting the kind of economic, market uprooting, social uprooting potential. And many models will start to kind of come to market.
What do we think the impact of white-collar jobs getting annihilated by this technology, if that in fact comes to pass?
I want to say one thing on this. Yeah, look.
Let me just share. Can I just give one example here? So here's a Reddit post that I was made aware of earlier this week. I lost everything that made me love my job through Midjourney overnight. I am employed as a 3D artist in a small games company of 10 people. Our team is 2 people, he basically explains. He says since Midjourney version 5 came out, he's not an artist anymore, nor a 3D artist. All they do is prompting, photoshopping, and implementing good-looking pictures. And he basically says this happened overnight, and he had no choice. His boss also had no choice. He says, I am now able to create, rig, and animate a character that's spit out from MJ, Midjourney, in 2 to 3 days. Before, it took us several weeks in 3D. The difference is that he cares about his job, and for his boss, it's just a huge time money saver. He's no longer making art. And the person who was number 2 in the organization who didn't make as good content as him is now embracing this technology because it curries favor with his boss. And he ends basically saying, getting a job in the game industry is already hard, but leaving a company and a nice team because AI took my job feels very dystopian. I doubt it would be better in a different company also. I am between grief and anger, and I am sorry for using
My gosh.
your art, fellow artists.
This is yet another reason that Figma really needs to close this acquisition from Adobe. I mean, it's like the value of these apps are just getting gutted. If you take a workflow management tool for things like design and imagery and you reduce it by an order of 90%, it's like, what is that app experience worth? And how could you replicate it if you were a big company that already has distribution? That's one comment. But what I would tell you, Jason, to answer the white collar question is I think there are a handful of companies you need to look at exclusively because they will be the first ones to really figure out how to displace human labor. And that is TCS, so Tata Consulting Services, Accenture, Cognizant. These are all the folks that do coding for hire work at scale. I think Accenture has something like 750,000 employees. So the incentive to sort of squeeze OpEx to create better utilization rates, to increase profitability is quite obvious. It always has been. They will be the first people to figure out how to use these tools at scale before the law firms or the accounting firms or any of those folks even sort of try to figure out how to displace white collar labor. I think it's going to be the coding jobs and it's going to be the coding for hire jobs that companies like Accenture and TCS
So those business processing
do for other people.
developer kind of folks, they're going to need half as many people, 25% as many people.
We're going to find out the efficient frontier.
Yeah.
I see it a different way. I mean, this argument that productivity leads to job loss has been made for hundreds of years, and it's always been refuted. When you make human beings more productive, it leads to more prosperity, more wealth, more growth. And so, yeah, it's easy to think about in a narrow way that jobs are going to be displaced, but why would that be? It's because you're giving leverage to other human beings to get more done. And some of those human beings, really anybody with a good idea, is now going to be able to create a startup much more easily. So you're going to see a huge explosion in creativity, in startup creation, new companies, new jobs. Think about the case of, Zuckerberg founding Facebook at Harvard. He wrote the first version himself, maybe with a couple of friends. That project happened and turned into a giant company because he was able to self-execute his idea without needing to raise venture capital or even recruit employees, even really before forming a company. Anyone with a good idea is going to be able to do that soon. You're going to be able to use these AI tools. They truly will be no code. You'll be able to create an app or a website just by speaking to some AI program in a natural language way.
So more flowers will bloom, more startups will bloom, more projects.
Now,
but wait a second,
it will create, I think, a lot of dislocation. But for every testimonial that is like the one that you showed, which I think is, I'd say, a little bit overly dramatic, I have seen 10 or 100 testimonials from coders on Twitter or other blogs talking about the power that these new tools give them. They are like, this makes me a 10x engineer.
Right.
And
exactly.
and especially these like junior engineers who are right out of school who don't have 20 years of coding history, they get superpowers right away. Like it makes them so much better.
The proper response from this.
Let me give you a response to that guy. So and using Sacks's point, that guy saying what used to take me weeks, I can now do in 2 to 3 days. And I feel like my work is gone. And that's because he's thinking in terms of his output being static. And if he thinks about his output being dynamic, he can now, in the matter of 3 weeks, instead of making one character, he can now make a character every 2 days. So he can make 30 characters in 3 weeks. That's an alternative way for him to think about what this tooling does for him and his business. the number of video games will go up by 10x or 100x or 1000x. The number of movies and videos that can be rendered in computers can go up by 10x or 100x or 1000x. This is why I really believe strongly that in some period of time, we will all have our own movie or our own video game ultimately generated for us on the fly based on our particular interests. There will certainly be shared culture, shared themes, shared morality, shared things that tie all these things together, and that will become the shared experience. But in terms of like us all consuming the same content, it will really, like with YouTube and TikTok, we're all consuming different stuff all the time. And this will enable an acceleration of that evolution and personalization. I'll also highlight, back in the day, one human had to farm a farm by hand. And we eventually got the tool of a hoe and we could put it in the ground and make stuff faster.
Excuse
and then we got a plow and then we got a tractor. And today, agricultural farm equipment allows one farmer to farm over 10,000 acres. You go to Western Australia, it's incredible. These guys have 24-row planters and harvesters, and it's completely changed the game. So the unit of output per farmer is now literally millions of times what it was just 150 years ago.
And in that case, Friedberg, nobody wants to do backbreaking labor in the fields, and everybody wants to have cheaper food. But in this case, let me just read you one quote that I didn't read in the original reading of this. He says, "I want to make art that isn't the result of scraped internet content from artists that were not asked." And so I think that's part of this, is that it's bespoke art. But the one question I had for Sacks was, Sacks, we started this conversation with saying, hey, this is different than anything in terms of efficiency that came before it. This is, I'm going to put some words in your mouth here, but this is like a step function, more efficient. So to the argument of, hey, efficiency has always resulted in, more ideas and we've found something to do with people's time. Is this time different potentially because this is so much more powerful? This isn't just like a spell checker.
I would say differently. I think, and I agree with what JCal is saying, because I think that the thing that technology has never done is tried to displace human judgment. It's allowed us to replace physical exertion of energy, but it has always preserved humans injecting our judgment. And I think this is the first time where we're being challenged with autonomous systems that has some level of judgment. Now we can say, and it's true, again, we're 4 months in, that judgment isn't so great. But eventually, and because of the pace of innovation, eventually it's probably not that far away, the judgment will become perfect. I'll give you a totally different example. How many pilots are there in the world? Will we, at some point in the next 10 years, want folks to actually manually take off and land? Or will we want precision-guided instrumentation and computers and sensors that can guarantee a pitch-perfect landing every single time in all kinds of weather conditions, so that now planes can even have 50x the number of sensors with a computer that can then process it and act accordingly? Just a random example that isn't even thought of when we talk about sort of where AI is going to rear its head. I think that this judgment idea is an important one to figure out, because this is the first time I've seen something that is bumping up against our ability to have judgment. And what this person was talking about in this Midjourney example is his judgment has been usurped.
Yes.
Yeah, I would disagree.
Well, I don't know about that.
Let me just make one point on this. So, an image is a matrix of, data that's rendered on a screen and as pixels, and those pixels are different colors. And, that's what an image is.
Is it, or is it the judgment of the creator?
Well, no, I'm just saying an image in general. So like when Adobe Photoshop and digital photography arose, photographers were like, this is, BS. Why are you digitizing photography? It was analog and beautiful before. And then what digital photography allowed is the photographer to do editing and to do work that was creative beyond what was possible with just a natural photograph taken through a camera. And they're arguably different art forms, but it was a new kind of art form that emerged through digital photography. And then in the early 90s, there was a plugin suite called Kai's Power Tools that came out in Adobe Photoshop. And it was a third-party plugin set. You would buy it, and then it would work on Photoshop. And it did things like motion blur, sharpening, pixelation, all these interesting kind of like features. And prior to those tools coming out, the judgment of the digital artist, the digital photographer, was to go in and do pixel by pixel changes on the image to make that image look blurry, or to make it look sharper, or to make it look like it had some really interesting motion feature. And the Kai's power tools created this instant toolkit where in a few seconds, you created a blur on the image. And that was an incredible toolkit. But a lot of digital artists said, this is automating my work. What is my point now? Why am I here? And the same happened in animation when CGI came around and animators were no longer animating cells by hand. And in every point in this evolution, there was a feeling of loss initially, but then the evolution of a whole new art form emerged, and an evolution of a whole new area of human creative expression emerged. And I think we don't yet know what that's going to look like with respect to what we're seeing here.
Do you think the level of judgment that AI offers you is the same as the level of judgment that Kai power tools offered you?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that the person making the judgment or the decision about which pixel to change into what color felt like, I have control. And I think it's ultimately like a sense of control.
I disagree with you. I mean, I think that this is...
it's a magnitude different. I'm with you, Chamath.
It's more than a magnitude different.
Yeah. It's a whole different
power
level.
tools, it's still it's on you. You
and I have sat in spreadsheets many times, and
I'm generally happy with this idea. So I'll give you a different example. Today, we use radiologists and pathologists to identify cancers.
Yep.
There are closed-loop systems. We have one right now that's in front of the FDA. That is a total closed-loop system that will not need any human input. So I don't know what those folks do. Except what I can tell you is that we can get cancer detection basically down to a 0% error rate. That is not possible with human intervention. That is judgment.
Right.
So I just think it's important to really acknowledge that this is happening at a level that it's never happened before. You may be right that there's some amazing job for that radiologist or pathologist to do in the future. I don't know offhand what that is, but these are closed loop systems now that think for themselves and self-improve.
I get it, but I think that there's an unfathomable set of things that emerge. We did not have the concept of Instagram influencers. We did not have the concept of personal trainers. We did not have the concept of all these new jobs that have emerged in the past couple of decades that people enjoy doing, that they can make money doing, that is a greater kind of experience and level of fulfillment for those that choose and have the freedom to do it than what they were having to do before when they had to work just to make money.
What do you think that radiologist or pathologist wants to do? Be a trainer or a Pilates instructor?
No, I think we don't know what that's going to look like. I think you're having the same,
You have any thoughts on this as we wrap this topic? It's obviously a lot of passion coming out here with the elimination of white-collar jobs in a massive way.
I think that this is a short-term versus long-term thing. In the short term, I see the benefits of AI being very positive because I don't think it's, in most cases, wiping out human jobs. It's just making them way more productive. You still need the developer. It's just that they're 5 times or 10x more productive. But I don't think we're at the point in the short term where you're going to be able to eliminate that role entirely. And what I've seen in basically every startup I've ever been a part of is that the limiting factor on progress is always engineering bandwidth. That is always the thing that you wish you had more of.
Totally.
It's the product roadmap is always the most competed on thing inside the organization. Everyone's trying to, get their project prioritized because there's just never enough engineering bandwidth. It's really the lifeblood of the company. So if you make the developers more productive, maybe it just accelerates the product roadmap. I don't think in the short term that what's going to happen is these companies are going to look to cut all their developers because 1 or 2 of them can do 10 times the work. I think that they're going to try and accelerate their product roadmaps. Now, again, you have this long-term concern that maybe you don't need developers at all at some point. But I think that the benefits of developing this technology are so great in the short to midterm that we're going down that path no matter what. And we're just going to have to find out what that long-term really looks like. And maybe the long-term will look very different. I mean, once we get past the short-term, we may have a different long-term view.
I think in this narrow vertical, I 100% agree with you. Look, I think that AI is going to eliminate unit testing. It has already done so. It's going to eliminate most forms of coding. The engineers that you have, all of them will now become 10x engineers. So with fewer of them or with the same number, you'll be able to do as much or more than you could have before. That's a wonderful thing. And all I'm saying on that specific narrow vertical is you'll see it first rear its head in companies like Accenture and TCS and Cognizant because they have an immediate incentive to use this tooling to drive efficiency and profitability that's rewarded by shareholders. It'll be less visible in other companies. But what I am saying, though, is that you have to think about the impact on the end markets for a second. And I think that AI does something that other technology layers have never done before, which is supplant human judgment in a closed loop manner. And I just think it's worth appreciating that there are many systems and many jobs that rely on human judgment, where we deal with error bars and an error rate that a computer will just destroy and blow out of the water. And we will have to ask ourselves, should this class of job exist with its inherent error rate, or should it get replaced fully by a computer which has no error rate? And I think that's an important question that's worth putting on the table.
Yeah, okay, so let's wrap here. I just have my final thought on it is like, you're going to see entire jobs, categories of jobs go away. We've seen this before: phone operators, travel agents, copy editors, illustrators, logo designers, accountants, sales development reps. I'm seeing a lot of these job functions in the modern world, like phone operators previously. I think these could wholesale just go away and they would just be done by AI. And I think it's going to happen in a very short period of time. And so it's going to be about who can transition. And some people might not be able to make the transition, and that's going to be pain and suffering. And it's going to be in the white collar ranks. And those people have more influence. So I think could lead to some societal disturbance. I do agree with you, Sacks.
I'm going to learn Pilates and be an influencer.
That's it. But I do agree with Sacks that the software development backlog, if this is what you're saying, is so great that I don't think we'll see it in software development for a decade or two. There's just so much software that still needs to be